Most people think that kidney damage comes only from salt or diabetes. But the truth is your kidneys are silently attacked every day by foods you would never expect. These foods clog, inflame, and chemically burn your kidneys from the inside. And the scariest part, damage builds slowly without pain until it's too late. Hello champions. Today we're going to talk about the top 10 foods that destroy your kidneys. So, we do this in reverse order and start with number 10, which is high sodium foods. And these are typically the packaged processed foods like soups, canned soups, frozen meals, TV dinners, and any sort of fast food. But it's not as simple as what you hear. For the most part, you hear sodium or salt being villainized, but it's not really the salt. It is the fact that you get all that salt without any potassium to balance it out. So, when you get the sodium in processed food and there's no potassium, now the sodium becomes a burden. And now the kidneys have to work much harder. It increases the kidney stress. It causes excessive sodium retention. It causes fluid retention, and with that increased blood pressure, and now that increased blood pressure causes extra friction, and you get microvascular kidney damage and all those microvessels and microtubules. But the important thing to understand here is that don't buy into the blanket statement that salt is bad. You don't want to be afraid of salt. You can sprinkle plenty of salt, and most people need more salt. However, you need the potassium with it. So, either you get a good balanced electrolyte like you like, I'll put a link down below, or you use it on real food. You use it on potassium-rich food, on plant food, on leafy greens and non-starchy vegetables. And number 9 is coffee creamers, and typically, when you think about that, it's like coffee plus cream. And it makes the coffee a little bit milder. But coffee creamers don't have any cream. They're non-dairy, and what do they put there instead? Well, they put a bunch of chemicals. They're typically very fake, and they're like flavored syrups. Some of the things you find inside are titanium dioxide emulsifiers, something that blends fat with water, and also artificial colors and flavors. And these have been found to cause leaky kidney membranes. They interfere with the structural integrity of the kidney tissue. And as a result, you could end up with protein in the urine, especially if you use these things long term. Number 8 is alcohol, and we know that alcohol in large amounts is not great. But alcohol causes dehydration, which places extra stress on the kidney because it has less fluid to work with to filter things. It produces a toxic load on all tissues basically, but it also results in something called uric acid. And uric acid are little sharp crystals. They have like glass-like spikes on them, and they're very abrasive and they will damage tissue. And the kidneys are the organs that need to filter out this uric acid. They also can form kidney stones. And when I put alcohol as number 8 on the list, meaning there's a lot worse things, it's when we're talking about pure alcohol, like distilled spirits in moderation. But it could get a whole lot worse if we combine the alcohol with different things like a lot of people will do. So, if you have mixed drinks now you're going to have sugar, which is fructose, and we'll talk about that separately because that's a really bad thing. Also, artificial sweeteners will make it a lot worse. We'll talk about those separately, and artificial additives, other chemicals that you put in there. And number 7 is green smoothies. And here's a big surprise to most people probably, because you think of green smoothies as the ultimate in health. That's something you do when you're on a health kick and you really want to treat yourself to something good. However, things like spinach, almonds, and beets that a lot of people put into these smoothies, they're very, very high in oxalates. And if you do these green smoothies and you just load them up with spinach and you do them every day now, you could get an oxalate overload. And these oxalates can form crystals and kidney stones. But I know what you're thinking because a lot of people will drink green smoothies and have very good results. So, what it all comes down to is how does your body handle oxalates? And there's a lot of different factors because they're not necessarily bad, but a lot of people are talking about them because a lot of people are reacting to them. And basically what it's about is if your body doesn't handle the oxalate, then they become a problem. So first of all, you can break them down. There are specific bacteria. So, if you have a very strong and varied microbiome, you'll probably have something called Oxalobacter formigenes, which will actually break down oxalates for you. And if you break them down, then you can't absorb them because they're not a problem in the gut. They're a problem in the bloodstream, and they end up forming stones and crystals and getting to the kidneys. And besides breaking them down, you can also bind to them. So, if you have oxalates, but you also have a lot of calcium and magnesium, now those minerals can bind to the oxalates, and if they're bound, now you also will not absorb them and they won't cause any problems. And then there's something called citrate. So, if you do absorb them now, citrate can be a good thing because citrate can bind to them and keep them from binding to calcium. So, if calcium binds in the gut, that's a good thing because then we can flush them out. If they get into the bloodstream and calcium binds, now they can form crystals and stones that way. And now once they're in the blood, it's a bad thing. But now citrate from lemon citric acid would be a decoy. It would keep the oxalates from binding with calcium. So, you would have less stones that way. So there are basically 3 ways you can get rid of them, and that's to break them down. It's to bind to them in the gut, so they get flushed out, or it is to eliminate through the gut or also through the kidney, because once they make it into the bloodstream, it's the kidney that has to filter out that uric acid. So, if we look at some of the factors here that can affect your ability to handle oxalates and how likely it is for the oxalates to do damage. If you have low hydrochloric acid, if you have low stomach acid, now you're going to absorb less of the calcium and magnesium. You can't really utilize it without stomach acid. And if you have a mineral deficiency, if there's not enough minerals in your diet, you also can't bind properly to the oxalates. If you have a weak microbiome, if you don't have a good diversity of bugs in your gut, then you probably don't have this oxalobacter that can break down the oxalates. If you have a leaky gut, then there's going to be more of the oxalates leaking into the bloodstream that way, even if they may have bound to some of the minerals, because now that's a larger complex. But if you have a leaky gut, they might still make it out. If you are dehydrated now, there's going to be more stone formation. The oxalates will tend to crystallize more, and it's going to place a higher burden on the kidneys because it's going to be more difficult to flush them out. And if you are constipated, then the food is going to sit longer in the gut and the oxalates are going to sit longer in the gut. So, you'll have a tendency to absorb more. So, it's not just a matter of having oxalates in spinach. There's a whole bunch of different factors that determine how well you handle them. Number 6 is artificial sweeteners, and these are a really bad idea for your kidneys. So all these extra phosphates, they create problems in that they accumulate in kidney, artery, and bone. So in bones, they're appropriate to a point until they disrupt the balance with the calcium. They're supposed to be a certain ratio, but they're not supposed to accumulate in kidney and arteries. Those are soft tissues. So, what happens now is in the kidneys something called renal osteodystrophy. So, renal means kidney, osteo means bone, and dystrophy means it's growing the wrong way. So, basically, the kidneys start to calcify and harden from the inside. Number 3 is NSAIDs, over-the-counter drugs, painkillers. And NSAIDs stands for nonsteroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. And it's not really a food. I know, but I had to have it on here on this list because so many people use them, and you need to understand something about them. So these are things like ibuprofen and naproxen, and there's a bunch of other related ones on the market. And what they do is they block a chemical messenger called a prostaglandin. And in doing that, they do it to the degree that they also block and reduce the blood flow to the kidney. And that's something we need to understand about the kidneys, is they get per unit tissue. They get the most blood flow of any organ in the body. They have 1% of the body weight, and they get 20% of all the cardiac output of all the blood that the heart pumps out. And the kidneys need all that blood, all that oxygen to perform their work. They're extremely hard working, but if we cut back on the blood flow, now they have to do the same workload. We don't have less toxins, less waste products in the body just because we reduce the blood flow, but now they have to do the same work with less oxygen. So now we're placing a huge stress on the kidneys. The tissues get very stressed. We increase the concentration of toxins because the kidneys can't keep up, so the end result is tissue damage and cell death in the kidneys. And if this is more than the occasional use, then we can get permanent loss of tissue. We can get permanent loss of filtering capacity. Number 2 is seed oils. And this is basically anything sold in the store. Anything mass-produced sold as vegetable oil. It could be corn oil, canola oil, soybean oil, and the reason that they're bad for you is not that the food that they're made from is all that horrible. May not be the best, but it's not really a bad food when it's growing, but it's how they process it. And it's very, very harsh. It's like an industrial product. In the processing, they use very high heat, very high pressure, and even solvents like acetone to get the last bit of oil out of these seeds or grains or beans that they use. And the end result is that you oxidize these lipids and lipid byproducts and you get something in the final product called aldehydes. And these aldehydes are not supposed to be in food. They are directly toxic to kidney cells. They damage the glomeruli, which is the smallest functional unit of the kidney, and they scar the tubules and over time the more we eat of these, they can degrade the filtration membranes as well. So overall, they do tremendous damage to the kidneys. And the number 1 worst food for the kidneys is sugar, any of its derivatives, and any product that it gets into. So, we're talking about drinks, sweetened drinks, we're talking about candy, sweet coffee drinks, cookies, cakes, desserts, etc. And it's not just white table sugar. It is, which we call sucrose. It is also high fructose corn syrup. But even things like agave, which sometimes is proclaimed as a health food because it has a lower glycemic index, well, it's the fructose that's the worst part in sugar. And agave has sometimes up to 80%. So agave is like an extremely high fructose corn syrup, except it may not be made from corn, but it's very high fructose. And even things like honey. Honey is also very high in fructose. So, when it comes to these, it's about quantity. So, if you're metabolically healthy and you use a teaspoon of honey, it's not going to kill your kidneys. But if you consume these things to the point where they're disrupting your metabolic health, your ability to process energy, then any of them can be a huge problem. And a lot of people think that sugar is just bad because it raises blood sugar, and messes with your metabolism and your blood sugar and causes insulin resistance. But the worst part about sugar is actually fructose and regular sucrose. Table sugar has 50% fructose, 50% glucose. But these other ones can actually have even more fructose, and fructose goes straight to the liver. Glucose and most types of energy can be processed by almost every cell in the body. But fructose can only be processed by the liver. And when the liver handles that, it uses up a lot of ATP, which is adenosine triphosphate. It's our energy currency. And fructose causes a breakdown of ATP. And adenosine, which is the backbone in adenosine triphosphate, it actually contains nitrogen, and this nitrogen turns into uric acid. So a lot of problems for the kidneys comes from uric acid because it's a crystal. It's very harsh, it's sharp and abrasive. And most people don't think about it because they associate uric acid with proteins and sugar doesn't contain any protein, but because it breaks down ATP and ATP has this adenosine with nitrogen sugar, and especially fructose is one of the quickest and most significant ways that we produce and raise uric acid. And this uric acid gets to the kidneys and it has to be cleared through the kidneys. And like I said, it's very abrasive. It can cause stones. It can cause galps in joints. And it causes most of the kidney damage that leads to scarring and permanent damage. If you enjoyed this video, you're going to love that one. And if you truly want to master health by understanding how the body really works, make sure you subscribe, hit that bell, and turn on all the notifications so you never miss a life-saving video.